Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brian Mines, and I'm an alcoholic. Before I get all wound up, I want to thank you for inviting me to San Antonio. I never thought I'd get to see the Alamo. And a friend of mine took me today, and I'm really enjoying this conference. I don't remember the first time I picked up a drink, but I do remember the first time I had gotten drunk. Somehow, looking back over my life, I seem to be able to remember more things about growing up than I can about being grown up. And I seem to be able to remember with pinpoint accuracy certain things that happened to me as a boy, much more clearer than I can anything that happened to me as a man. And this took place at the end of the Second World War. I was about 10 years old, and in New York, it was one of the first block parties they threw for the returning soldiers and sailors and Marines and the WACs, the Waves and the bands. And it took place on the Upper East Side of New York, on 98th Street between Lexington and Park Avenue. And I remember they had tables, just tables laden down with food that you hadn't seen throughout the whole war. And there were people, and there was banners hanging off the fire escapes, and there was flags, and there was hugging and kissing and crying, and all New York's hoi polloi was there. The Mayor LaGuardia was there, and Congressman Vito Marcantonio, and the senators, and the chief of police, and all the godfathers. Everybody was there. And it was a festive time. And every 10 feet they had a huge keg of beer donated by Knickerbocker Brewery. And I remember sitting on the stoop with a friend of mine, Johnny, and this soldier. And he was a hero. He had all sorts of medals and braids. And he had a mug of beer in his hand and a cigarette. And he took a puff of the cigarette, he inhaled the smoke, and he said, I went to China. I had a hot cup of coffee, and with that he would drink the mug of beer down, and I brought the smoke back, and he blew the smoke out. And what fascinated me and Johnny wasn't so much him drinking the beer. I mean, everybody was drinking beer, but the way he made the smoke disappear. I mean, he'd take a puff of the cigarette, the smoke would be there, it'd disappear. He'd go to China, he'd have a hot cup of coffee. With that, he'd drink the mug of beer, and he'd bring the smoke back, and he brought the smoke. So with the free beer and the free cigarettes, Johnny and I were puffing away, going to China, having a hot cup of coffee, we're drinking a mug of beer. And the end result was I was smoking like a professional, and I was drunk as hell. I remember falling off the stoop, and Johnny falling off after me. We're trying to get up, we're bumping into the people, and they're biting us off the head, and we're throwing up and staggering all over. And that's the first time I can recall getting drunk, and I remember it with great fondness. And there were a lot of such parties in those days. And many times I had gotten drunk. And I remember at 3 o'clock school would let out, and I get the shoe shine box, and I go along 2nd Avenue in all the saloons, and 3rd Avenue, Lexington Avenue. And I would come home late in the evening, and these soldiers and sailors and Marines and the merchant seamen, they'd be sitting on the neighborhood stoops. And they'd be passing around these containers of beer, and they'd be telling stories of war and death and destruction, in fights and jails and whorehouses. And I'd be sitting there in the shoe shine box looking up at them with love in my eyes. I mean, I loved these guys. These were the big guys. These were the guys that went out and they did it. I mean, they just didn't talk about it. They did it. They would go in, they'd bring out the German helmet with the bullet hole right through the center of it, or a broken bonsai sword, or the blood-splattered Japanese flag, or the Italian cigarettes, or German money. I mean, these were my heroes. And they'd be passing around a container of beer, and every now and then I get a hold of it, and I start juggling on it, and they grab it out of my hand. Hey, kid, take it easy, and they give me a little shot in the head, and, you know, they knew my father, Big Harry, they never said anything. Well, about a year or two went on, now I'm growing up and getting into the big league, and we're about 12, 13 years old. And instead of shoe shining, now I'm selling papers in the saloons, and I get down to the news building, and I get the news in the mirror, and I hit all the saloons selling the papers, and I get home late at night. I get home about 11 to 12 o'clock at night. And these young soldiers and sailors and Marines and merchant seamen, they were no longer sitting on the neighborhood stoops. Now they were down along the East River in the park benches. And they were sitting along the river on the vacant buildings, on the back of vacant lots, because these were the winos. They didn't work. I come from a work ethnic background, and the only requirement for becoming a man was a desire to work. As long as you had a desire to work, you could beat your wife, beat the kids, beat the system. You could beat anything you want as long as you had a desire to work. And they broke the cardinal rule. They no longer worked. And I remember I get down there and they'd be passing around a Sneaky Pete, the bottles of Muscatel, and they'd be telling stories of death and travel and destruction and fight in jails and whorehouses. And the bottle would come to me, and I'd kick in a quarter or half a buck into the kitty. And they'd come to me and they wouldn't say anything because I was paying my way. And I remember it was on a Saturday. I was 13 years old. Johnny and I, we had some money from hustling the papers in the saloons the night before. And I went way in the back of a vacant building, and they were all passed out. I remember kicking this one guy, one of the winos, give him a boot in the ass to get up and come out. And I gave him the money to go get his 3 bottles of Sneaky Pete. I remember this guy as one of the most handsomest men I could ever remember. He stood about 6'2". He had jet black curly hair, big blue eyes. The most he could have been was anywhere from 28 to 33 years old. And here he was, a wino. And I remember 3 years prior to that, at that block party, the mayor trying to have his photograph taken with him because he was a war hero. Tokyo Rose had mentioned his name a few times on her program that they had scouts out in Japan trying to kill him. And here he was, an old, young, dirty man. He was a wino. And I remembered something in my head, just noticed that. And he went and he got the 3 pints, and he come back. And he got his pint, he shuffled into the building, and Johnny and I went way in the back of the vacant lots on 97th Street, and I cracked mine, and Johnny cracked his, and we started drinking and laughing and giggling and body punching with each other and walking up the street, and I remember bumping into the people, bumping into them. It was my first experience with beer muscles. You know, your world beat them only about that big. We went and I got the guy out again, goes three more pints. And I remember it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon of this Saturday when I cracked that second pint. I remember it. And the next thing I knew, I come out of a blackout. I had my mother was holding my head over the kitchen tubs. I was throwing all this wine up into the tubs. My 2 brothers have been leaning over, beating the hell out of me, screaming at me, "Where had you been all day? Where the hell had you been?" The neighbors had told my mother that his son was drunk and staggering all over the neighborhood. And my mother and her family and friends, they scoured the whole neighborhood and they couldn't find me. And they didn't find me until 11 o'clock at night. And I just didn't know. I mean, this was the first time I pulled a blank. I've been drunk many a time, but this was the first time I pulled a blank. 2 o'clock, I put that pint to my mouth, and here it was, 11 o'clock at night, and I just didn't know. And it troubled me. And a couple of days later, I'm walking up the block, and one of these big guys come walking down, and I stopped him, and I started to talk to him and explain what happened. I remember the guy, he had his hands in his hip, and he's kind of rocking back and forth, looking down at me, smiling. And when I was finished, he turned around, he said, "Kid, were you drinking?" I said, yeah, I was drinking. He said, "Were you drunk?" I said, yeah, I was drunk. And he just smiled, and he leaned back, and he gave this big shrug. He just shrugged, didn't say anything. He tossed my hair, walked around me, and kept going. It seemed like all my life I had seen that shrug. All my life I'd seen that alcoholic shrug. Remember, I go into a bar, there wouldn't be a soul in the bar, and they say, "Where the hell is everybody?" They say, "They're out looking for Joe's car. He doesn't know where he parked it last night." They'd be going up and down, searching all around the neighborhood, looking for Joe's car. And somebody say, "Was Joe drinking last night?" They say, "Yeah." "Was Joe drunk last night?" And they say, "Yeah." And they just shrugged. They never said anything. They just shrugged. I'd walk in the bar and they'd say, "Mary just left. She's crazy. She's going hysterical. She doesn't know where the kids are. She doesn't know where she left the kids." And somebody would say, "Is Mary drinking?" They say, "Yeah." "Is Mary drunk?" They say, "Yeah." They just shrugged. A blanket endorsement. I mean, they never said anything. Well, anyway, with phony papers, I forged my papers and I ran away and I went to sea at 17. And the shrug followed me. No matter where I went, the shrug, it seemed to be right there with me. It seems like some kind of voodoo or juju. I remember in Singapore, I'd gotten into a fight and I got pretty bad cut up and pretty bad beat up. And then the police came and they took me to the hospital where they stitched me up, and then they threw me in a hole for 3 days. And in those days, Singapore was still a British Crown colony. And I remember when they called me out and they put me in the docket, sitting up there was the English magistrate, and he had a big white curly wig on and a long black flowing robe. And representing me was the American consulate. And when he called me out of the docket, I looked like one of these punk rockers or one of these wrestlers. I mean, half of the head was shaved like a mohawk and all stitched up, and the other part, the hair was standing straight up in all different colors, and my face was all black and blue, and the stitches and the shirt was all blood, and I was a mess. And I remember they put me in the docket, and the magistrate leaned over and said to the American consul, he says, "Was the bloke drinking?" And the American consul leaned over, he looked at me, he said, "Were you drinking?" And I looked over and I looked at the American consul, eyeball to eyeball, one American to another. And I said, "Was I drinking?" I said, "Of course I was drinking. You don't think I look like this sober, do you?" I said, "What the hell kind of an American do you think I am anyway?" I said, "Of course I was drinking. I was drinking. They were drinking. We were all drunk." And he looked up, he said to the magistrate, "Yes, your magistrate, the bloke was drinking." And the judge leaned back and he went like this here. The American consul went like that. The captain went like that. I went like that. And ladies and gentlemen, that's the story of my life. It was just one shrug after another. That's where alcohol took me. It reduced me and my life to a human shrug. They would say, "The ship sailed for Panama last night. Is Brian aboard?" Yeah. Does Brian have any money left? Is Brian coming home tonight? Is Brian going out today? Where is Brian? Whatever happened to that nice girl he was going with? And that's it, ladies and gentlemen, just one shrug. That's it in a nutshell. About 1969, they come out of a blackout. And I was talking to this voice in the phone, and I was sort of weaving in and out of this blackout, and this voice is saying, take it easy, Brian. Take it easy, give us your address, we'll send a couple of men over to talk to you. And I couldn't quite figure out who this guy was. I couldn't recognize the voice. So I threw out a couple of words, hoping maybe he'd bite, and I could fill in around the sentence to figure out who this guy was. And once I sent a couple of men over to talk to me, and he kept saying, take it easy, Brian, give us your address, I'll send a couple of men over to... I said, finally, what do you mean you want to send a couple of men over to talk to me? I said, who the hell are you anyway? He says, I'm so-so from Intergroup. Now, if you never heard the word Intergroup before, you must admit, it sounds like some kind of a communist word. I said, Intergroup? I said, what the hell are you talking about? I said, what the hell do you mean Intergroup? Who are you? He says, I'm so-so from Intergroup, Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, Intergroup, Alcoholics Anonymous? I said, how the hell did you get my number? He said, you just called us up. I said, I called you up. What the hell would I call you up for? And he said, look, Brian, take it easy. Give us your address, I'll send a couple. I said, wait a minute. Don't you be sending anybody around here starting trouble. I'll give you something. I'll give you a punch in the puss. That's what I'll give you. And I hung up the phone. I sat down. I put my head in my hands, and the sweat just started to pour out of me. And my mind raced back and forth in retrospect, trying to figure out what the hell did I do this time that Intergroup would be after me. Because the only thing I knew about Intergroup was the old Jimmy Cagney movies and Humphrey Bogart. And in those movies, when Intergroup was after you, it meant one thing, you know? So I got up and I put the lights out, and I put my head up against the door thinking maybe I could hear footsteps or keys rattling in the hallway. And then I crept across and I leaned up against the window and I pulled the shade out and I searched out the doorways across the street thinking maybe I'd see an Intergroup guy over there, you know, smoking, looking up at me. I mean, what the hell did I know? Well, anyway, 1970, I come out of another blackout, and I'm talking to this voice on the phone again. And the guy told me where the meeting was. And the meeting was on 72nd Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenue, the old Butterfield group that they had there. And I went. And the only thing I heard at the meeting was stay out of one bar at a time. Now, I'm sure in my rummy head what this guy was saying was stay away from one drink at a time. But I heard stay out of one bar at a time. And I walked out of the meeting. I walked up to 3rd Avenue, 72nd on 3rd Avenue, and I walked all the way up to 93rd Street on 3rd Avenue with saloons on both sides. And I walked into a bar that I drank in 93rd Street. And I walked in, I ordered up my usual sobering up drink, which was a large club soda with a big twist of lemon in it. And I started to drink it. And the next thing, I felt my brains getting dizzy, my body and my legs shaking, and I went into a fit. And when I come out of the fit, I was in the ambulance with this friend of mine, Jackie, and this big attendant kneeling on top of me, and he was trying to ram something in my mouth, and I didn't know where the hell I was, and the next thing, I grabbed him, I rolled him over, I got on top of him, I started beating the shit out of him. He started screaming into the ambulance driver to stop the ambulance. The ambulance came to a screeching halt. The driver came running around, he opened the door, I gave him a boot in the face, and I jumped over, and I took off like a shot with Jackie after me, and I ran up this block, and Jackie's chasing me, and I ran down this block, and Jackie's chasing me. I spotted a bar, I ran into the bar, the people scattered, see me coming in, I'm huffing and puffing up against the bar. Jackie comes running in after me. He's huffing and puffing. I grabbed him. I said, what the hell happened? God damn it, Jackie. What the hell's all that about? What happened? He says, I don't know. He said, you come in the bar, everything is all right. Next day you went into a fit. Now, the only thing I could attribute the fit to was his Intergroup stuff. I mean, you know. I go to the meeting, they tell me to stay out of one bar at a time. I pass all these bars, nothing happened to me. I go in one stinking bar and I wake up in an ambulance. And I said, holy Jesus. I said to Jackie, no wonder these people are anonymous. I mean, they could kill a person in broad daylight and never leave a fingerprint. I said to Jackie, I said, that's it with this Intergroup stuff, Jackie. I said, God knows I tried. I said, they had one crack at me, they goddamn near killed me. I said, that's it for me. Well, anyway, in 1969, I was on a ship. We're about 3 days out of the Suez Canal, and I was drinking. There was a bunch of us who were drinking on the ship, and I heard that a storm was coming up, and I figured the storm was coming to get me. And I remember when the storm hit, and I was drunk, and I had a bottle in my hand. I drew open the door, and I staggered out on the deck, and I'm laughing at the storm and cursing at it, and kicking at it, and peeing against it, and crying. And anyway, the storm picked me up, slammed me around and busted my shoulder. They wanted to take me off in Alexandria, and I wouldn't get off. And I figured, well, another week we'll go through the canal and I'll get off in Naples, which we didn't. They took me off in Naples, and they took me to the hospital. They had me there 3 days, and they put me in a body cast with the arm, and I had a big ball underneath it. And they had me there, and the agent took me out to Rome, to the airport, and we were a couple of hours early. And I told him, I said, look, you're married, go home, take care of your wife and family. I'll just get a couple of postcards and let the boys in the bars know what the hell is going on. And I sat down and I had a little cappuccino and I said, let me have a little brandy. And I started drinking. And by the time the plane arrived in New York, I was drunk in hell, and I come down that ramp like a drunken runaway construction boom. I was banging into the wall, and sparks are coming out, and people are screaming, and here I am. Well, anyway, 1970, I'm on another ship with 5 days outbound for Japan, and the storm came up again, and I figured, here's that storm still looking for me, and I'm drinking, and the storm hit, and I go staggering out on the deck, and I'm laughing and peeing against it, and punching it, and singing and crying. Well, the way he picked me up and slammed me up against the housing and shattered the lower part of my back. So for the rest of the trip to Yokohama, they had me tied in the bunk, belly down, and by the time we got to Japan, they took me off and had me in the hospital 16 days where they operated on me, and then they took me out, and the agent drove me to the airport, and no, I hadn't drank in about a month now. He took me, and I figured, we got a couple of hours to go. Look, you're married. Go ahead, go back. I'll just get a couple of postcards and let the boys know what's going on. And I sat at the bar, and give me a little sake. Come on, a little sake over here. Well, the end result was I'm on the plane. I'm drunk as hell. I passed out, and by the time I came to, the drain had come out, and there was a big puddle of blood on the seat. And they had me in the back, and they were wiping me clean, and they had to borrow one of those old Kotexes and pack me with the Kotex. And when I got to Anchorage, they had to take my clothes out and get me new clothes. I was a mess. And I figured, the hell with this going to sea. I mean, it seems like every time I was going to sea, it seems like there was a whole school of angry Moby Dicks out there waiting for me. Like they had nothing against Captain Ahab, it was me. And I figured, the hell with them. They can keep the sea. I'm not going to die over it. The hell with them, you know? And I came back and went to work in the tunnels. I've been a sandhog pretty much most of my life. And for you, a sandhog, we're the guys that dig the tunnels underneath the river, that work in the compression chambers and decompress in the bends and all that sort of stuff. And I was working on a job on the west side. I was a dynamiter on the job. And I was passed out. I was on a drunk. I was passed out of my apartment. All of a sudden, I hear this banging and kicking at the door, and it's the union delegate telling me, open up the door, Brian, open the door. Kick the goddamn thing and open it up. And I finally get up, and I open the door, and I let him in. He come into the apartment. Phew, Jesus. Man, this place stinks. You know, he went over, he opened the window, and through the window, he looked around. The place was a mess, you know. He said, God damn it. He said, when the hell are you going to come off this drunk? When are you coming back to work? He said, we can't keep covering you on the job. I said, shh, keep it quiet. The neighbors are hearing. I said, what's the big deal? I'm just in a drunk. What are you making a big deal about it for? He said, how long do you think you're on this drunk? I said, I don't know, maybe a week or so. I sort of vaguely remember people coming and going. He said, you've been on this drunk 6 weeks now. We've been covering the job for 6 weeks. You got to get back to work. What? I said, all right. I said, what's today? He said, today's Wednesday. I said, all right, look. You tell him I'll be back Monday. I'll be back on the job Monday. He said, Brian, you're sure now? I said, you can take booking that. I'll be there. I'll be back Monday. Now, all my life, all I ever needed to come off a drunk was a floor, a toilet, and some water and privacy. And I go through the whips and the shingles and the shakes and the craps. And usually I could bail out in about 3 days. And I went back to work Monday morning. I went 7 o'clock. 9 o'clock, they called for the dynamite. I loaded up all the dynamite, went down through the compression chamber, up near the heading. And when you get up near the heading, all the lights go out. And they pull back all the lights for fear that maybe an electrical charge will set off the dynamite. And they went up and they started to load the dynamite. And it's all eerie and there's no lights. It's all headlights and air lights. And all of a sudden, I went into a convulsion. And they all started screaming. They said, what's going on? I don't know. It's Brian. Where is he? He's over there. No, he's over there. No, you're standing on him. And I'm flopping all over the place. So somebody called out for an ambulance, and the ambulance heard something about the dynamite, and there was a lot of bombings and going on in New York, and they called a SWAT team, and the SWAT called the mayor, and by the time I got out, they had me in a basket. They took me up. They all had flak jackets on and guns and baseball bats and binoculars, and I come out of the basket. I'm shaking, and the mayor started yelling at them for wasting his time with a fool like that, and I'm all... Well, anyway, they were claiming I was an epileptic, and they won't let you work in the tunnels if you're an epileptic because they figure maybe you could have set the charge off, or maybe a runaway car, motor or something. So they wouldn't let me go back to work until I went for a whole battery of epilepsy tests, which I did. And I remember the second day sitting outside the neurosurgeon's office waiting to be called, and all of a sudden he stuck his head out. He said, Mr. Mines? I said, yeah, over here. He said, he gave me the wave. As I walked into his office, I stopped and I took a big, deep breath. And I walked in his office, and he's sitting there, and he's shuffling the charts all around. And he said, well, everything here, Mr. Mines, looks pretty negative. And I heard the word negative, and I let my breath out just a little bit. And I said, What do you mean negative? And he said, well, everything here looks pretty good. And I let my breath out just a little bit more. And I said, do you mean to say I'm not an epileptic? He said, no, you're not an epileptic, you're an alcoholic. I said, yeah. I said, I'm not an epileptic though, right? He said, no, you're an alcoholic. I said, then I didn't have an epileptic fit. He said, no, you had an alcoholic seizure. I said, oh, thank God. I reached over, I grabbed him, I started hugging him. I mean, what the hell would I care about being an alcoholic? As far as I'm concerned, any man worth the salt is an alcoholic. You see, the key was I wasn't a wino. If you're a wino, forget about it. I mean, they don't even have the decency to count to 10. They won't even count to 3. You're just out. And not only are you out, but don't you come back. So him telling me I'm an alcoholic is like a bank president putting his arm around me telling me, don't worry about the loan, Brian, the next one up is yours. What the hell would I care? I had him put it in writing. I went back, I saw the same for the engineer and the job. I threw it on the job. I said, here, I'm an alky, not an epi. There it is. And he read it. He said, so you're an alcoholic, huh, Brian? I said, yeah. He said, so am I. I said, no kidding. He said, you going back to work? I said, yeah. He said, you want a drink? I said, sure. He pulled out the bottle. He started sucking on it. I started sucking on it. And I went back to work. I mean, life was good. Here I went. I had my job back. They couldn't fire me. I'm only an alcoholic. I just found a newfound friend. He's an alcoholic with a bottle tucked away. Life was good. But there was something wrong because every time now I was trying to come off a drunk, I was convulsing. I convulsed in the subway. I convulsed in the middle of the street. You don't know where the hell it was coming. And I was worried about it. And a friend of mine, Joe, who I was born and raised with, went to sea together, and now we're working in the tunnels together. Joe had been sober in AA for 7 years, and he had been 12-stepping me all along. And he heard the trouble that I was in. And he came up to the house and he said, look, Brian, why don't you attend a couple of AA meetings with me? Why don't you come? Just come to a couple of meetings. And I agreed because I just tried to get a handle on this convulsion stuff. And I went, and we went to back-to-back meetings, and at the second meeting, I heard the speaker guarantee that if you don't pick up the first drink, you can't get drunk. He guaranteed that if you don't pick up that first drink, it's impossible to get drunk. And when the meeting ended, I made a beeline for the stairs, and everybody stopped. And they started to say the Our Father. And I couldn't believe it. And I turned around, I searched out Joe, and there was Joe. He's sort of holding his two fingers and rocking and with his eyes closed and rocking back and forth. And I looked at Joe and I said to myself, Joe, what did they do to you, Joe? I mean, here was a guy I drank with. I mean, a guy you could really bank your money on. Here he is now, psalm singing with the best of them, I mean, here he is. I mean, Jesus and psalm singing. I figured, oh, for crying out. Afterward, he said, look, we'll go for a cup of coffee. We went a couple of blocks away from the church. We're having coffee. I leaned over. I said, look, Joe, just between you and me. Nothing to do with the people over there, Joe. Just between you and me. I said, Joe, did you understand what that guy said up there? That if you don't pick up the first drink, you can't get drunk? And Joe said, sure, I understand it. I said, Joe, deep down in the caverns of your bowels, Joe, did you really understand what that guy said? That if you don't pick up that first drink, you can't get drunk? And Joe said, yeah, sure, I understand it. I said, Joe, if you understand it, what the hell are you doing there for 7 years? I said, this is my second meeting, Joe. I understand it. I said, of course, Joe, it's impossible. Of course they're guaranteeing you that it's impossible to get drunk if you don't pick up the first drink. That's like me guaranteeing you, Joe, if you don't leave the house tomorrow, you won't get run over by a train. Can't you see, Joe? You're being bullshitted, man. You're throwing good money in the basket of horse shit, Joe. And Joe said, look, Brian, please, take the meeting book. Try 90 days, try 90 meetings. I said, Joe, maybe you don't mind sitting there in the front row, humped over, squinting up at the speaker, slurping your lips like some kind of AA Quasimodo, sucking around people's ankles for sobriety. I said, Joe, sucking around people isn't my idea what being a man is all about. You got to get up there, Joe. You got to head into the storms. You know that. And Joe said, look, try 90 days, 90 meetings. Just then, from the church a few blocks away, the bells start ringing, and I broke out laughing. I said, Joe, somebody got your job. You better get up there, Joe. And I took off, and that was the fall of 71. And I stayed sober all throughout the holidays. Now, I'm born and raised in Yorkville. I live in 86th Street, and that's where the St. Patrick's Day parade breaks up. And I know everybody. I mean, years and years. I mean, I know them all, And I hadn't drank all this here time. My two nieces, they came in from Westchester. And I remember walking up 86th Street towards the parade, and I had a camel hair coat and a Russian cassock hat on with sprigs of shamrocks and a green tie. And everybody was slapping their hands, shaking and taking pictures. And I got up to Lexington Avenue, and they were all yelling at the marchers, and they're passing around the booze. And a bottle came to me, and I took a slug, and that was to put me in the grip of the grape this time for 2 weeks. This time, I mean, the fears were so great, I never left the apartment. I had the windows locked, the shades drawn, the phone off the hook. The only phone calls I made was a liquor store across the street. The only friends and enemies I had was the furniture. I remember standing in the middle of the room. I'd be standing there squinting toward the horizon, my eyes squinted with murk, the breeze gently blowing through my hair, my shoulders squared away, my nostrils flared with excitement, teeth bared with lust, my hands opening and closing. Truly, I stood there a man amongst men. All things to women. I'd be standing there and Jackie and Nasser's be on their knees with her arms around my legs saying, please, Brian, I love you, take the money, take the money. And I'd say, money, and I'd throw my head back and laugh and say, you can't buy a man like me with money. And I'd pick her up and I'd throw her out. Next minute to be banging at the door, be Sophia Loren. Please, Brian, please, just once. And I'd fight and I'd throw her out and I'd slam the door and I'd yell through the door, why don't you women leave me alone? Can't you see I'm only human? Leave me alone. I'd stand in the middle of the room, I'd be huffing and puffing because I just knocked out Muhammad Ali for the heavyweight championship of the world. I was always knocking this guy out, and I would always knock him out March 16th so I could lead the St. Patrick's Day parade down 86th Street. And I could see myself making that wide turn at Fifth Avenue. And just as I'm making the turn, the major domo would have the stick in the air. And all of a sudden he'd bring it down and the bagpipes would pick up and the drums and the cops on the horses be skittering all over the place. And you hear the screaming of the women. My God, it is him. There he is. Is it him? Yes, that's him. And the cops would have their arms locked trying to hold back these women. And they'd be reaching, trying to touch me. And they'd be knocking the cops' hats off. And every now and then I'd hear one of the cops say, what a man. What a man. I'd be standing in the middle of the room, and I'd have a bottle in my hand. I'd be weaving back and forth, and I'd be holding the bottle up, and the tears would be rolling down my eyes. The hair was wild and matted from sweat, and I'd have the growth of beard, and a vomity, dribbly old T-shirt. Everything I drank and puked was all over it. And this T-shirt, the only thing white on it was the sweat marks around the bottom here, and these warm, wrinkled, farty shorts hanging off my hips, and my toes caked with black, smelling sweat. And I'd be weaving back and forth, and the tears would be coming down my eyes because it was the third year in a row that I had won the Academy Award. Well, anyway, April Fool's Day, 1972, Intergroup finally came and they got me. They took me off to a 5-day detox. And I don't ever want to forget that when they were taking me down the alcoholic section. My brother-in-law had one arm, the nurse had the other arm. The hair was wild and matted from that 2-week drunk. I had a 2-week growth, the vomity, dribbly T-shirt. Naturally, those warm, wrinkled, farty shorts. I mean, they went with me. If I got up, they got up. If I fell down, they fell down. When I got locked up, they got locked up. I'm telling you. One day, mark my words, ladies and gentlemen, one day, shorts like that will hold their own meetings. Believe me. And God knows they deserve them. Believe me. And I had a pea-stained pair of pants with the fly broken, half open, half closed, so I never needed a belt. I just took them off, kicked them in a corner, picked them up, threw them on, and these paint-stained pair of slippers, the right foot on the left foot on the right, and this is the way they were taking me down. As we got closer to the nurse's station, right opposite was the men's lounge. This guy stepped out. I could see him through the corner of my eye, and he spotted the three of us coming down, and he stepped back into the men's lounge. I could hear him say, hey, guys, come out, look at this guy, a real wolf man. Take a look at this guy. And they come out and they started laughing, and they started laughing and saying to the nurse, don't touch him, nurse, you'll get lockjaw. And they all started laughing. And I remember one guy saying, nah, this guy's not real, he's on April Fool's Day. They're just trying to scare us. And this is the first time in my life, ladies and gentlemen, that a man or a woman ever laughed at me, and I couldn't do anything about it. I remember I was standing there with my head down, and it seems like somebody had used a machete and cut up all my neck muscles and my back muscles. I just couldn't get my head up. And you know how the voices go to work on you? The voice was saying, look at that. Look at them laughing at you. You dirty snake. You've been nothing but trouble all your life. Everywhere you've ever been, you've been nothing but trouble. You're nothing but a laughing stock. For once in your life, try to be a man. For once in your life, try to do something right. Get your head up and look at these people. God damn it, get your head up. And I kept trying to get my head up, ladies and gentlemen, but I just couldn't get it up. And if there was one thing at that moment I wish I could have done, and that was to grab myself by the head of the hair, yank my head up, and spit right into my face. That's how I felt about myself. It was the second day on my 38th birthday, And I was physically bankrupt, mentally bankrupt, spiritually bankrupt, financially bankrupt, and sexually bankrupt. I see now in retrospect that I've been slipping in and out of impotency since I was about 28 years old. And it was tough. I was a sandhog and a bartender and a seaman. And I'd be in a bar and the guy would turn around and say, yeah, I took the girl home last night and I made love 2 or 3 times. And this guy here, he would take the girl home and he'd make love 2 or 3 times. And this guy over here, he would take the girl home and he'd make love 2 or 3 times. Well, I see now in sobriety that if these guys were taking these girls home, making love 2 or 3 times a night, one thing was for sure, they weren't drinking what I was drinking, that's for sure. You don't drink that stuff and go home, make love 2 or 3 times a night. You go home, fall out of the bed 2 or 3 times a night. I know for a fact you'll get up and pee-pee 2 or 3 times a night. That I know. And I'm not trying to belabor this sex thing, but the only reason I'm bringing it up is because maybe some guy out there just kind of knows what I'm talking about. As for the women, they know what I'm talking about. Right? And I remember laying in a bed and I had the sideboards up because every now and then my nose would hit and boom, I'd fly out of the bed. They'd pick me up and they'd throw me back in the bed. And I remember it was about 2 o'clock in the morning and I was laying there and this nurse came in and she looked like she was about 28 years old. She had long, sheen black hair and big white eyes on her and she looked rich. Like she was born with a silver spoon in her mouth, that she never had worked a day in her life. And she came over, she sat on my bed, and she started cooing to me. Take it easy, Brian, take it easy. I know what you're going through. And I was there, and I still had the 40 shorts on and the vomiting. I wouldn't let them touch me. And she's looking at me, and I knew that this was part of a gig, but I said, look, I know you mean well, but why the hell don't you just get up and get the hell out of here? Don't tell me you know what I'm going through. Just get the hell out of here. I've been in worse situations than this, and I'll beat it, and I'll beat this one too. And she got up and she says, all right, Brian. She says, I'll leave you alone. Then she leaned over and she said, but don't you dare ever tell me I don't know what you're going through. I'm an alcoholic, Brian, and I've been in many a room like this, in many a bed like that. Now, when she said to me that she was an alcoholic, it was like the fist of Gulliver coming out of nowhere and slamming me in the chest. It hit me with such an impact, if it wasn't for the bed springs, it would have driven me right through the deck. Never in my life did I ever think there was such a thing as a woman alcoholic. I mean, we didn't even know men alcoholics, either a bum or a whiner or a freeloader or a go-for, but never. Now, I drank with women all over the world, and I drank with them in penthouses, and I drank with them on park benches, and I drank with them in doorways with old house dress and the buttons missing and no underwear on them, and their feet caked with blood from walking the streets in search of a drink, and never did we ever think of these women as alcoholics, because usually they were a friend's mother or sister or aunt or niece or wife. And we never thought of him as an alcoholic. But somehow when she said to me that she was an alcoholic, something broke through. And she started talking to me. She was the first one who just didn't shrug and tousle my hair and walk away. She started to explain. And then she kept talking and my mind just kept racing and racing. And all I could keep saying to myself was, of course. Of course. And she would say something else, and I'd say, of course. It just made sense. I knew that it had something to do with the first drink, because I knew that if she picked up a drink, she would look like me, because having picked up the drink 2 weeks prior to that, I looked just like her. My nieces were proud of me when I was walking up the street. I was clean and decent looking, and here I was, a human stink laying in a bed, and something had gotten through. And 5 days later, they released me, and they suggested 90 days, 90 meetings, and I came steaming out. And the greatest thing that had gone for me was anger. I had this angry drive never to pick up another drink. I'm one of these fortunate alcoholics that never had a white knuckle sobriety. Whatever it was what alcohol it gave me, whatever it took away, it took away. I have no amends to make to it. It has no amends to make to me. I begrudge no man or a woman a drink. They can do what they want. I'm the alcoholic. I don't pick up the drink. And I came out and they suggested 90 days, 90 meetings. And I searched out all the old timers and I would buttonhole them and ask them, where did you get the idea 90 days, 90 meetings? I mean, where did you get why 90 days, 90 meetings? And they say, I don't know. Nobody seemed to know. And it was important to me, ladies and gentlemen, to find out why 90 days, 90 meetings. Because all my life, as a boy, I remember them ramming these mystical numbers into my head. I remember in school, there was the 12 apostles, and the 10 commandments, and the 12 lost tribes of Israel, and the 7 seas, and the 7 winds, and the 8 wonders of the ancient world, and the 7 deadly sins, and the 9 planets. And Moses was in the desert for 40 years, and Columbus was on the Atlantic 40 days and 40 nights, and now me, 90 days, 90 meetings. And I would ask everybody, why? Am I cosmic? What is it? Why? But it didn't take me long, ladies and gentlemen, to figure out why you have to be here 90 days, 90 meetings. And I came to the conclusion that you have to be here 90 days, 90 meetings just to understand what the hell they're talking about. Because there's a very sophisticated way of speaking in these rooms. You see, the topic would be, you see, by not taking an action, you took an action. Oh, they go, oh, what a topic. Oh, God, what a topic. You see, you see, it was when you did not make a decision, that is when you made the decision not to make it. Oh, they go, God almighty, oh, what sobriety, what sobriety. The one that always got me was, you see, you can't keep it unless you give it away. In fact, you have to give it away. And the more you give, the more you get. And I would say to Joe, what the hell are they giving away? They don't work. They're all unemployed on welfare. Joe, half of them are in alimony. Can't you see, Joe? We're being bullshitted, man. And we say, look, let's not get into that again. Just keep coming to the meetings, keep coming to the meetings. And I kept coming to the meetings, and I remember I'd sit there and I'd look at these beautiful young girls. And it seems like their life was over, that the whole life revolved around needlepoint. Every now and then I'd hear a big burst of oohing and ahhing from the back of the room, and I knew they discovered a new floral pattern. And in my mind's eye, I'd see them pearl 1, drop 2, identify. Pearl, and I could see them just pearling and dropping and waiting, I guess, until the menopause, and then just wait till death, you know? And I would say to Joe, it's so unfair. Look at them, Joe. Look at them. You can see they never did anything, Joe. And they never will now. Their sponsors will see to that. And all the men walked around. They all looked like Prince Valiants with the latest page boy hairdo, the little Lulu hairdos on them. And they'd all walk around and they had names like Crash and Dash and Biff and Griff. I come from New York, and the saloons where they had names with dignity and meaning, names like Killer and Crush and Knuckles, you know. I mean, to this day, you go into one of the bars in the neighborhood, you don't have to ask the bartender who Harry the Nose is. You look around, you'll see who Harry the Nose is. It was simple. And I remember I would, in the first 90 days, it seems like I kept running into the same cluster of speakers. And it seemed like all the speakers had a little gimmick that they were selling. And I had nicknames for the speakers. And I gave them nicknames like Little Mary Bliss. There's First Things First, Joe. One Day at a Time, Joe, you know, Sam. I had all these nicknames. And this one guy got up and they introduced him. His name is Charlie. And Charlie got up and they introduced him. And Charlie said, I picked up a drink. I fell down a flight of stairs. And I surrendered. And they all started to applaud and hug him and kiss him, get his autograph, invite him to parties. I sat there stunned. I mean, I fell off gangways and bar stools and garbage cans. And never in a million years would I ever tell a shit story like that in public. I immediately nicknamed him Staircase Charlie. And about a week later, they introduced Staircase Charlie again. I said, oh, there's Staircase. And I got up front, and I zeroed in on the story. And I wouldn't miss a word because it was important to me to find out what kind of a staircase it was that made him surrender. He may say he picked up a drink and he fell down a 4-story spiral staircase. All right, by the time you thump down, all right, you know. Or maybe he's going to say he picked up a drink and he fell 5 stories between the banisters all the way down. All right, I could buy that. But there was something the way Charlie and the way he was dressed and the way he looked that I knew that this guy was strictly a 2-step foyer job. I mean, I could tell. And he went into his story and he said, I picked up a drink, I fell down a flight of stairs, and I surrendered. And they all started to applaud him, hug him and kiss him, invite him to parties. And I remember sitting there saying, why don't this guy tell a real story? I mean, nobody picks up a drink, falls down a flight of stairs and surrenders. Why don't he tell me he had been drinking all day? The guy was drunk. Why don't he tell me he was drunk? That's why he fell down a flight of stairs. You see, they kept telling me, bring the body, Brian, bring the body. Sooner or later, the head will follow. Here it was, a week later, I'd heard the same story, but I heard it just a little bit different. And they introduced this guy in about a week and a half later. Now, this is the third time in the month I'm listening to this guy. I knew his story by heart. And I'm sitting there, and he got into the story, and as he got close to picking up that drink, I felt my stomach tighten up, and I said, uh-oh, watch the drink, Charlie, watch that drink. And he got closer and closer. I said, Charlie, can't you see what you're doing? Watch the drink, Charlie, watch the drink. And Charlie said, and I picked up a drink, and I said, oh, well, grease the banisters, there goes Charlie. I know in my heart of hearts, ladies and gentlemen, once he picked up that drink, no way in hell could he beat the staircase. I lay odds from here to Vegas. I knew he was going head over heels down that flight of stairs. And I could see all the contributing factors that led to picking up that drink. I could see it. He never got involved, never made meetings, didn't have a meeting book, never got a sponsor, come early, go late. I mean, I could see all the things that he did that led to picking up the first drink. And that was the first time I fully identified with the first drink. And I kept coming to the meetings, and I kept coming to the meetings. And I remember I was at a meeting, and I was having lunch with my mother. And on her dresser, she had one of those birds. Remember the birds used to put the beak in the water? It would go up and down. It just keep going up and down. And I'm having lunch, I'm looking at it, and the bird is going up and down. I felt like getting up and just slap it off the dresser. I said to my mother, I said, Mom, what kind of a bird is that? And she said, what? I said, that bird there. And the bird is going up and down, up and down. She says, I don't know, some kind of a novelty bird. I said, no, Ma, please. It's important to me. What kind of a bird is it? What's the name? She says, I don't know. I guess a dodo bird. And I said, that's it. And I vowed then and there never to become an AA dodo bird. I used to hate it when I sit at the meeting watching the dodo birds. The speaker would say something like, I finally took my sponsor's advice and I went to the bank manager and I explained, I just don't have the money. I just don't have the money. And it was all right. It was all right. And they all go, oh. Or the speaker would say, for the first time in my life, I looked out the window, and I looked out the window, and I leaned out the window, and it was all right. It was all right. And they all go, And I said to Joe, what the hell are they nodding about, Joe? And he says, they're nodding about feelings. They're identifying. I said, identifying with? I said, I mean, where I come from, honest to God, ladies and gentlemen, nobody ever spoke about feelings. Nobody ever identified with anybody. Nobody spoke. There was, I think, 4 or 5 ways that you could cover the gamut of feelings and emotions. That was good, pretty good, bad, pretty bad. And in order to get your point across, you merely raise and lower your voice. How's things going? Yeah, good, pretty bad, pretty good. If you said any more, you're a bullshitter. If you said anything less, you're a crybaby. So, I mean, that was the way it went. And I remember I was at a meeting, and it was a lady from Queens. The most I can remember about her was that she had red hair, glasses, a broken nose, and she was a mother. And that's all I could remember. And right in the middle of a qualification, I caught myself nodding like a mule. Man, I was pumping up and back. I remember searching out Joe, telling Joe. And he said, that's it. And that was the first time you hear it's the language of the heart, ladies and gentlemen. It was the first time I fully identified with another human being. Ladies and gentlemen, I may never see you again, never meet you again. I don't know anything about you. But if you tell me you're an alcoholic, there's something that I know about you. I know your fears and your aspirations and the guilt and the shames and the sorrows. I know you. It is the language of the heart. And I identified, and I immediately nicknamed AA the Land of Nod. And I remember, and I'd be hustling along, one of the guys would grab me, hey, Brian, you got $5 to be all drunk, come out of the saloon. He said, where you going? I said, the Land of Nod. He said, Land of Nod? What's that, a new bar or something? I said, hey, you spend that $5, you'll find out soon enough. I'll see you. And everything kept going, ladies and gentlemen. But I stayed away from the closed meetings and the step meetings because of the concept of God. I had walked away at 14 from the religion that I was raised in, and nobody, including you, was about to start ramming God down my throat. But I happened to be at a beginner's meeting when I went into the concept of the higher power. And one said it was this, and another said it was this, and another said it was that. And I remember this man raising his hand saying the way he had heard God was G-O-D, good orderly direction. God, G-O-D, good orderly direction. Now, speaking for myself, ladies and gentlemen, when I heard that good orderly direction, it seems like my chest split open and centuries of venom and stink poured out. But here now was a God that I could understand, good orderly direction. As far as I was concerned, that's what God was supposed to have been all along, was good orderly direction. But from where I came from, the way it was presented to me, I just couldn't buy it. But this I could. I remember leaning back and behind the speaker, it had first things first, keep it simple, let go and let God. And the way I read it was first things first, keep it simple, let go and let good orderly direction. And good orderly direction became you, AA. And all you were asking of me was to try to stay away from a drink, try to do the best that I can, and try to get to a meeting. And if I can help another alcoholic, try to help another alcoholic. And I literally turned my will and my life over to care of good orderly direction, which was you. But it wasn't so much that it was the concept of God, because I remember him telling me, don't worry about God, Brian. If you pick up a drink, they won't be sending God back to detox, they'll be sending you. It's you and that first drink, remember? And everything became good orderly direction. I go to the job, I see the guys fighting on the job, getting fired. I see some guy dragging a woman out of a cab by the hair of the head. I see some guy puking between two cars, urinating up against the wall. I see some old, young, dirty man trying to hustle a few bucks to get in the bar and drink. I see some guy vacantly staring out of a bar, vacantly staring at life passing him by, a life that will continue to pass him by as long as he keeps drinking. And I would say to myself, there, but for the grace of good orderly direction goes I. And it made all the sense in the world, ladies and gentlemen, because I no longer did any of those things, because I trusted in you. And all you were asking of me was to try to stay away from a drink, Brian. Try to do the best you can. Try to get to a meeting. But it wasn't so much that it was the good orderly direction. The word that got me, ladies and gentlemen, was the word direction. All my life I had been looking for some type of direction. I'd be a liar if I stood up here tonight and told you all I ever did was drink, carouse around, and foul up. That wasn't me at all, ladies and gentlemen. I was always trying to be a man, ladies and gentlemen. I was always trying to do the right thing. I was always shining my shoes, trying to put my best foot forward. I was always washing my face, combing my hair, trying to make that first good, long-lasting impression. I was always saying I'm sorry. I was always looking for a job. I was always trying to make amends. I was always trying to pay my bills. I was always an alcoholic. And I was always and always and always. And here I was in a room full of alcoholics offering me good orderly direction in my life. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I may have been everybody's drunk, but I assure you, I was never anybody's fool. I knew right then and there that if I didn't make it with you, I wasn't going to make it. And I turned everything over to you. Everything. And I went on. I was about a year sober. And I was making meetings and helping groups and working the phones at Intergroup. And I was about a year sober. And I was working on the Dynamite up in Van Cortlandt Park at 4 to midnight. And usually around 12 o'clock in the afternoon on 86th Street, they had this bench with a water fountain next to it. And I would sit there after breakfast and I'd sort of have a coffee or a few cigarettes and get myself together before I'd go to work. And this one particular day, I'm sitting there and I had a container of coffee in my hand and I had a cigarette in the other one. And out of nowhere, this little kid come running up the street. She looked like a little Shirley Temple, with little curls on her hand, dimpled knees and big dimples, and a big lollipop. And she come running over me, plopping right on my lap. And she's pushing this lollipop up against me. I'm sitting there, I'm looking down. I never got married, no kids. I don't know anything about children. And she's pushing a lollipop at me. And the mother came up, and I looked up the mother, and the mother looked down at me, and she said, she wants you to lick it. Give it a lick. So I took the lollipop, I stuck it in my mouth, I took a big slurp and rolled my eyes, I took it back, I handed it to the kid was jumping up and down, she plopped the lollipop in the mouth and started skipping off up the street, and the mother smiled at me and nodded, and I smiled and nodded at the mother, and as I was watching the two of them walk up the street, all of a sudden this tremendous feeling of love overcame me, this tremendous feeling practically lifted me off the bench, this beautiful feeling of love, and I'm looking at these two walking up the block, and I kept saying, this is good orderly direction. Because up until this time, everything that was happening to me was good orderly direction. And I kept saying, this is good orderly direction. But for the first time in that year since I had heard that good orderly direction, it didn't quite fit what I was experiencing. It didn't quite fit the feelings. And I heard myself saying to myself, this is not good orderly direction. This is the God of the rooms. This is God. This is the God of sobriety they've been talking about. And I just leaned back in the bench. I couldn't believe it. Here I am with a cigarette in one hand, a cup of coffee in the other hand, my knees crossed, the taste of a kid's lollipop in my mouth, and God, I just couldn't believe it. I said, God bless you, God. Like I went over his head to his boss or something. I mean, you know what? And it all started coming together, ladies and gentlemen. It all started to come together. And I was about 4 years sober when I got a phone call from San Francisco, telling me that they were taking the bicentennial ship out of Bat, Maine, but I'd like to be one of the crew. Now, I hadn't sailed since 1970, and this would be the first time I'd be doing this, and I was on it. And I agreed. And they said it'd be a couple of weeks before they fly the crew up. And about a week before we were to leave, a friend of mine and another guy, they were going to pick up this guy, Roy, that they sponsor, who was on the drunk, about 6 o'clock in the morning, and drive him up to Connecticut. And by the time they got there, whatever happened, whatever went to Roy said, I don't know. He opened the window and he drove out 27 stories. So when they got there, it was a mess. He had a wife and 5 kids, and the police was there, and the ambulance, and it was a mess. And Roy was half Jewish and half Catholic, Irish Catholic, and the mother flew in from San Francisco, and there was a big fight over having him cremated, and there was a big fight over the ashes, and it was nasty. And Roy had been a seaman. And I gotten together with a sponsor and the other one, and we got the families together. We sat down, and they explained that I'll be leaving in a week. Why not give the ashes to Brian? And when Brian goes, they'll bury him at sea. And that was about the only thing they agreed on. And they gave me the ashes. And when the ship sailed, I went up and I saw the captain, and the captain agreed to bury him, but I needed the death certificate, because I have a burial at sea. It's an official burial. They have to enter it in the logbook. And I didn't have it, so when the ship got to Panama, I called up the wife, and I said, remember, make sure that you send me the death certificate in San Francisco, which we got. And then when the ship sailed, the captain came up and asked me, he said, when would you like to have this, the burial at sea? And I thought, and I said, if it's possible, Captain, I'd like to bury him on the international date line. Because somehow, I remember hearing in these rooms, the alcoholic, we're always in tomorrow or in yesterday, we're never in the now. And the international dateline is that one split second of the eternal now. It's Earth's phenomena. It's a time zone. It's that one split second. And I figured that's where I want to bury him, in that one split second of the now. And the day came, and all the passengers came out, and the crew came out, and the two cadets, they had the plank with the American flag and the ashes. And before I left in San Francisco, I bought 5 long stem roses, red ones, one for each one of the children, and I bought a yellow one for the wife, and I had them stapled together in the small plastic Serenity card, and made sort of a bouquet. And then when they picked up the ashes, went in, the flowers went in. I remember the flowers being tucked in along the ship and then caught up in the wake. And I remember looking at it, and I couldn't help but think, I don't know what went through Roy's head when he jumped out that window, but he was alone and drunk when he died, but he's buried with dignity. I like to think he was buried with fellowship dignity. That's what we offer each other, ladies and gentlemen. That's what's in the hand, the outstretched hand of AA, is dignity. They say the eyes are the windows of the soul. I believe when a newcomer comes in, that's what they see. They see hope in our eyes, but they don't see the silent dignity in our hands. That's what we do. We dignify one another in these rooms. And I had gotten the longitude and latitude, and I had some photographs taken of the burial. And when we got to Japan, I mailed them to the wife, so at any time she can go to the map and just trace out the longitude and the latitude and see where her husband was buried. And the kids can go and trace it out and see where their father was buried. And in time, their grandchildren can go and trace it out and see where their grandfather was buried. And they can do it with dignity. And we sailed on, and before I left, I had registered with GSO as an internationalist, as a traveler, and had given me the list. And on the list of loners, these loners, they're in lighthouses, they're in these remote places of the world. There was this one priest, a missionary, way up in the hills of Taiwan, and I was at one of the ports that I hit, and I started to correspond with him. And he wrote me and he said, Brian, if it's at all possible, if you can get to see me, I'd like to take the 5th step with you. This guy was sober 5 years, and he had never told a soul face to face his story to another human soul. It was all done through tapes and letters and postcards. And he would like to take the 5th step. There was a couple of times getting in there before I finally put together some time, and I rented out a car with a driver, and we went clippity-clop over the hills and dills and the rice paddies, and we got way into the hills of Taiwan. I met the man. And I spent the whole day with him taking the 5th step. And I remember this guy, he'd be talking to me in English, and next time his eyes are rolling in retrospect, and all of a sudden long tangents of Chinese, and he'd be English and in and out of Chinese and English, and I'm looking at the guy, and I realized how important it is to have a sponsor. How fortunate I had been, because what this guy was telling me was not what was on the paper. What he thought and what he was saying was 2 entirely different things. That's why it's important that you take it with another human being, because what you're thinking may not be as what you're saying, and what you're saying may not be what you have written. And I realized how lucky I had been to sober up in New York, and I realized how blessed he was to have sobered up with the help of GSO and people writing and people like me searching him out, and it was just wonderful. And ladies and gentlemen, I sailed on. I made meetings all over. And when your time comes, please get out there. Please get out and travel. The hand of AA literally reaches out from the 4 points of the compass. No matter where you go, AA is there. The wonderful thing about this program, ladies and gentlemen, is that if you get to a country and AA isn't there when you get there, then AA is there when you got there, because you're AA, and she's AA, and he's AA, and I'm AA. That's what we are. We're AA, and it's that hand, that outstretched hand. So don't be afraid. Just get out there. Believe me, it's waiting for you. And I came back, and with the help of the people in the program, they got me into Fordham University and going to school 3 nights a week. I graduated with a degree in fine art in 1982. And I did a lot of things, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of things in my life, a lot of things drunk and a lot of things sober. And I think the one thing that I'm most proud about is the one thing that I was the deepest shamed about, and that was the fact that I didn't know how to drive. It's not that I didn't know how, it's just that I was phobic about driving. I was just petrified. I know about when people are afraid of heights in the tunnels or elevators or escalators, because I was phobic about driving. And I was ashamed. Here I was, this guy traveling all over, and I always had to depend on somebody to take me somewhere. And I was sober. About 5 years ago, a friend of mine, a young lady that I saw on occasion, she had just gotten her license. She came up and she banged at the door, and she came in. She said, "Come on, let's go." She said, "I'm taking you to driving school." I said, "Oh, don't start that again." And she showed me her license. It was her first license. Most people in New York, ladies and gentlemen, don't drive, and nobody has cars, so it's not a necessity to drive in New York. So I went with her, and she registered me, and I went, and every night I go and I take the drive, and they drive me. I have to drive all the way up to Yonkers Raceway and then drive back. And when I came in the meetings, you could always tell that I had a driver's license, because I come in looking like the Michelin Man. I'd be all locked up, like I'm walking in. I'd sit down, my neck would be frozen. And the day come for me to take the test, and the guys drove me down, they wet nursed me, and I took the test, and I did what I had to. And a couple of weeks later, I come home from work, and there was a motor vehicle letter, and I opened it up, and it was my license. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, and the tears just running down my eyes, because here was a license. Ladies and gentlemen, I fantasized everything in my life, but I never fantasized owning a Cadillac, picking up girls. I never fantasized being a famous racing car driver, because it was beyond fantasy, me and driving. And I had the license about 6 months. And whatever happened this one morning, I don't know. I just got up quiet and I made myself a cup of tea. And I walked up to Avis and I rented out a car. And I drove. And there was only one diner. It was important that I drove to a diner. And the only diner I knew was out in Rockaway. It was about 25 miles away. You had to go over a bridge. And it was important to go to a diner, because that was the one fantasy that I had. Was I've seen you do it in movies and on television. You'd see the guy drive the car, and he'd park, and he'd get up and he'd walk into the diner, he'd sit down and he'd order a container or a cup of coffee, and everybody loved him, and he'd make out with the waitress, and he'd get out and he'd open the door and slam it. And I mean, it was really, to me, the one macho image. That was it, to be able to drive to a diner and order a cup of coffee. And I drove, and it beeping the horn, and I just kept going straight ahead, and the ice cold sweat running down my armpits. And finally I parked in this diner, and I got out and I walked in. You could hear the water squishing on my toes, my shoes, my pants was all wet. And I walked into the diner, and I sat down, and I ordered up a cup of coffee. And ladies and gentlemen, for me, they don't come any better. That was the greatest day of my life. And I remember getting out, and I got in the car, and as I started backing the car out, the voices started to work at me, and the voices would say, "Look at him backing that car out. Look at him turning that wheel. What a man! What a man!" And that was the last time I ever rented a car. I still don't drive. I mean, but I got a piece of paper to saying, New York told me if I want to drive, I can drive. And I did a lot of things, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of things in my life that I'm proud of, and a lot of things sober. I have a driver's license now, and I have a college education, and I'm retired from the tunnels, and I'm into a new field. And last week, it was my 19th anniversary, and 2 days before that was my 57th birthday. And I wish I could stand up here and tonight and tell you that I finally know what I want to be when I grow up, ladies and gentlemen. I'd love to be able to tell you, here I am fully potentiating. I finally hooked in. I finally know what I want to be when I grow up. But the fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And it's not all that important. It's not that important to know what you want to be. What is important, I found, is to know what I am not. That's the key, to know what I am not. I'm not that young man the FBI took off in handcuffs in Mobile, Alabama, and had to stand trial for near beating a man to death. I'm not that man the FBI took off in handcuffs in New York and had to stand trial for mutiny. I'm not that man dragging a woman out of a cab at 3 o'clock in the morning, dragging her back into the bar because I hadn't finished drinking yet. I'm not that guy puking between the two cars or peeing up against the wall. I'm not that old, young, dirty man being shuffled into a detox. I'm not that man sitting in a bar vacantly staring out at life passing him by. No, ladies and gentlemen, I am not a lot of things, thanks to you. I am not a lot of things. And somehow, by seeing the many things that I am not, I begin to see the many things that I am. And on those rare occasions when I do have the courage and the wisdom to take a long, hard look, I see the many things I can yet become if I continue to adhere to the principles of this program, if I continue staying away from a drink, if I continue reaching out to the suffering alcoholic. I was in San Francisco a few years back when I heard a young lady say something that completely blew me out of the seat. She seemed to have taken all of you and the conference and the big book and the steps and the traditions and reduced everything to the lowest denominator when she said, by no means has AA opened the gates of heaven and let me in, but they sure have opened the gates of hell and let me out. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank each and every one of you for letting me out. On my bended knee, I thank the Almighty God for each and every one of you. And on my other knee, I thank each and every one of you for me. Thank you for me, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.